Welcome to Com 400 Qualitative Research, and are in video number 3 now. We are looking into reliability and validity in qualitative research. Can you have reliability and validity in qualitative research? Well, yes, you can. We usually think of it in terms of quantitative, and we have specific statistical tests we can use, but we can also do that in qualitative research. How do we get that? Well, there are 3 things that we can use. The first is that the researcher must take good notes, because the researcher is, you are the instrument, so you need to take good notes to make sure that those are accurate. You also need to guard against selective perception. Now, what is selective perception? You might have heard about it in Com 300, in Com theory, where you talked about selective perception, which is one of the theories that we talk about. And selective perception is noticing only what you are predisposed to notice. Now, that becomes a problem, because if you have a theory and you're trying to get that theory supported, or a hypothesis, it's easy when you're in qualitative research to only notice the things that support your theory, and that can be a problem. So selective perception is a problem. This is also sometimes known in non-academic circles as confirmation bias. You tend to notice things that confirm your own beliefs. So I used to have a colleague, and he always would ask people who were giving a presentation when they would visit us when I was at Louisiana State University. He would always ask as a great question, what would you have expected to find if your hypothesis was not true? And so in addition to just saying, here's what I'm looking for, he would want to find out, did you also look for the things that would not be there? And that's how you move away from selective perception, by actually looking for things that support or don't support, and then you can get a good justification. So another thing to look at is to guard against subject reactivity. And this is another part of validity and reliability. Subject reactivity is when you're observing people and they react differently because they know they're being watched. If you're watching somebody, you may notice them get uncomfortable. I certainly do if I find somebody kind of glancing at me. Occasionally I'll be at a restaurant or someplace, and for whatever reason somebody is kind of looking at me. And if you've ever looked at somebody and they don't look away, you probably felt a little uncomfortable. I know I do. And so you may be observing things that people are doing because you are actually watching them. People react differently when they're being watched than when they are not being watched. It's like the difference in being at home and being outside. Maybe you wear different clothes, etc. And so we act differently when people are watching us. So that can be a threat to validity. You want to make sure that does not actually happen. And the definition, once again, is subject reactivity is when the subject reacts differently because the presence of the researcher. Okay, now we're going to look at 5 kinds of qualitative research. Now I'm going to go over the list. It's kind of like flying the airplane and looking at the map, and we're going to land and look at it closely and examine what we actually have. Now, one of the things, as we talk about different things, I'll be listing some different things. So I'm going to talk about the first 5 things that we're going to be going through, so you don't lose track of where we are. The first of the 5 kinds of qualitative data is field observations. Second is focus groups. The third is intensive interviews. The fourth is case studies. And the fifth is ethnographies. A very interesting kind of research. Let's look at the first of those, though, which is field observations. And this is useful for collecting data and generating information for hypotheses and theories. It's practical in advertising and PR situations as well, very practical. In advertising, You want to see how people are interacting with your product, whether what their actual reactions to that are. In public relations, you want to find out what people's questions are, what people's thoughts are in relation to your institution, and just about everything else. It's good to find out. A journalist, that's practically their whole job is assessing what people are doing. So. That is the basis of field research. We're also going to look at 6 stages of field operation techniques. So we're going to talk about that. Remember, we still have 5 kinds of qualitative research. We're going to come back to that. But we're first going to look at 6 stages of field observation research, in case you would do that someday. The first of those things is choosing the research site. It's very important to choose the right place where you're going to research. Sometimes you might say, well, I would like to do this at a restaurant, and then you can't get permission to be in that restaurant. Or maybe you want to go to someplace and observe how people behave in hotels, and the security says you can't do that, and the manager won't let you do that. So you have to get permission, and the first is choosing the research site. Hopefully you're going to do that. You want to select first a setting where the behavior occurs. Maybe an example would be, you want to observe how people under this quarantine, how strangers interact with each other in a public place. That would be interesting. That would be something that would be interesting. Maybe difficult to do, but it would be interesting to see that. So to do that, you would say, well, what place do I want to go? Maybe you would, you might think of a couple of places now. I would think, the first place I would think for me would be, there is right out this window, there is a park, and Washington Park, and so maybe I would go there. It's interesting when you go out there. I'm there quite a bit walking, and sometimes I will meet people, and we're very socially distant, but sometimes, a lot of times now, people will not make eye contact where they used to. And I think that's because everybody is trying to keep a distance, and there's also seems to be some something social there where they don't even want to interact or have any kind of interaction. It's a kind of an interesting phenomenon. So, but that might be a place. Another place might be a grocery store. What's some great research you would have with people in a grocery store who maintain social distance, who doesn't, how they react to you. I've heard people say, oh, the cashier looked at that and said, oh, that is not essential. That's kind of an interesting bit of communication and how that comes about. So a couple of things that you would look for in finding your site. The first is the site should be permanent and stable. Well, that makes sense. The second is researchers should case the scene first. I watch a lot of military movies, and they always send a lieutenant out and say, Lieutenant, get us a sit rep. And that means situation report, and that's what they mean by casing the place. Find out, is this a place where you could actually unobtrusively get information on a behavior? So that would be the first thing. The second is researchers, or the third thing rather, is that the site should be one where the researcher isn't known. You don't want to go someplace and have people go, oh, hey, Dr. Banning, I see you're here. What are you researching? Are you researching me? What are you researching? And this creates a disturbance. And so you want to go someplace where, in many circumstances, where you aren't known. The next thing that we're going to look at in regard to the 6 stages of field observation are gaining access. That's the second thing. We're going to talk about that on our next video. I'll see you in a minute.